The story of Job, a lesson in faith and resilience. Hey there! Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a guy named Job. This story is kind of like a big lesson on patience, faith, and how to deal with tough times, even when everything seems to go wrong. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. So, there was this guy named Job. He wasn't just anyone, he was pretty awesome. He lived a long time ago in a place called Uz. Job was super rich. He had a huge family, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned a lot of animals: sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. Job was also really kind. He helped the poor, treated his workers well, and was known for being a good, honest person. He was the kind of guy everyone respected. Imagine having all the coolest stuff, a big family, and living a happy life. That was Job. Now, here's where things get interesting. Up in heaven, God was talking with a being called Satan. And yes, it's that Satan, the one who likes to cause trouble. God was bragging about Job. He was like, "Look at my guy Job. He's awesome. He's loyal, faithful, and he always does the right thing." But Satan wasn't convinced. He thought that Job only acted good because everything in his life was perfect. Satan made a bet with God. He said, "You know, if you take away all of Job's stuff, he'll curse you and turn his back on you. He's only good because life's easy for him." God was like, "All right, you want to bet? Go ahead and test Job, but you can't harm him physically." So Satan got to work. One day, while Job was chilling with his family, a messenger came running up. He said, "Job, you won't believe this. Your oxen and donkeys were stolen, and all your servants were killed." Job was probably like, "What? That's awful." But then, before he could even process it, another messenger showed up. "Job, fire from heaven burned up all your sheep and more of your workers." Job was in shock. How could this happen? But it didn't stop there. Soon, another messenger came, breathless, saying, "Job, all your camels were stolen, and your servants with them." And just when Job was probably thinking, "It can't get worse than this," another messenger burst in. "Job, a big storm came and killed all your children. They were at a party, and the house collapsed." At this point, Job was probably feeling like his world was crashing down. All his animals were gone, his servants were dead, and worst of all, his kids, his precious children, were gone. But here's the crazy part. Job didn't get mad at God. He didn't yell, "Why me?" He didn't curse God. Instead, he said something really powerful. "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." He stayed calm. Can you believe that? Now, Satan wasn't done yet. He went back to God and said, "Okay, so Job didn't curse you when he lost all his stuff, but what if you actually hurt him? If you make him suffer, then he'll definitely turn against you." God said, "All right, go ahead and hurt him, but don't kill him." So, Satan gave Job painful sores all over his body, think boils, like big, oozing pimples that were really painful. Job sat on the ground, scraping his sores with a broken piece of pottery. It was so bad that his wife came up to him and said, "Why don't you just curse God and die? What's the point of being alive if your life is this awful?" But Job didn't listen to her. Instead, he said, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Now, 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, heard what had happened to him, and they came to visit. They didn't say anything at first. They just sat with Job for 7 days and nights, not speaking a word, because they saw how much he was suffering. But eventually, Job broke the silence. He asked, "Why was I even born? Why did I have to go through all this? What did I do wrong?" His friends didn't really help much. They started saying, "Job, you must have done something really bad for God to punish you like this. You must have sinned and brought this upon yourself." But Job was like, "I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve this." Now, Job wasn't perfect. He did ask a lot of questions. He wondered why bad things happened to good people, and he questioned why God would let him suffer. But he never lost his faith in God. He just didn't understand what was happening. After all this, Job was getting tired. He wanted answers. He wanted to know why everything went wrong, but instead of answering all his questions directly, God spoke to Job in a huge storm. God said to Job, "Where were you when I created the world? Do you know how I made the stars or the oceans? Can you control the weather or the animals? God was reminding Job that he is bigger and knows more than we ever will. God has a plan that we don't always understand, and sometimes things happen that are beyond our control. Job finally realized that even though he didn't get all the answers, he could trust God, who knew what was best. After all the pain and suffering Job went through, losing his family, his wealth, and even his health, God wasn't done with him. In fact, God had a much bigger plan in mind. After Job spent all that time questioning and wrestling with his suffering, God finally spoke to him. He reminded Job that he is the creator of everything, and sometimes we don't always understand the bigger picture of life. But here's the important part. God wasn't just going to leave Job in his misery. Job had stayed faithful through all his suffering, and God was about to reward his patience and trust in him. The first thing God told Job to do after he spoke to him was to pray for his friends. Those same friends who had been accusing him and telling him that all his suffering was his fault. Even though they weren't completely right in their advice, God asked Job to pray for them. And Job, being the humble and forgiving person he was, did exactly that. Now, you might think after everything Job had been through, he would have been bitter or angry with his friends. But Job's heart was still good. He prayed for them, and in doing so, he showed that he still trusted God's wisdom and that he had a forgiving spirit. God accepted Job's prayer for his friends and forgave them for their wrong advice. But that wasn't the end of the story for Job. Once Job prayed for his friends, something amazing happened. God began to restore everything Job had lost. First, Job's health was fully restored. All those painful sores, all the sickness that had made him miserable, gone. Job was healthy again, and he felt better than ever. Imagine going through something as awful as Job did, and then suddenly feeling completely healed. That must have been such a relief for him. But God didn't stop there. God also gave Job back everything he had lost in terms of wealth. Job had been a rich man before his suffering, and now God blessed him with even more than he had before. In fact, Job ended up with twice as many animals, oxen, sheep, camels, and donkeys, than he had before. It's like God was giving Job back everything, but with a bonus. The most emotional part of Job's restoration was the fact that God gave him a new family. While Job had lost all 10 of his children, the ones he loved deeply and mourned for, the Bible tells us that God blessed Job with 10 more children. This time, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, just like before. It's important to note that even though Job had new children, the Bible tells us that he didn't forget about his previous children. The memory of those who were lost was always with him, and he likely carried that grief in his heart. But the fact that God gave him new children to love and care for was part of his restoration. The Bible even tells us that Job's new daughters were the most beautiful women in the land, and Job gave them an inheritance. Something unusual in that time, showing how much he cherished them and wanted to give them everything he could. And you know what? Job didn't just live for a few more years and then die. No, God blessed him with a long life. Job lived for another 140 years after his restoration. During those years, Job got to see his children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren grow up. He had a large, happy family once again. Job spent his last years in peace, surrounded by loved ones. And the Bible says that in the end, Job had more wealth, more happiness, and more blessings than he had ever known before his suffering. In fact, it's said that Job was richer at the end of his life than he was at the beginning. His life was full again, and God had truly restored him in every way. Job's restoration wasn't just about giving him back the things he lost. It was about showing that even after suffering, God has the power to bring good things back into our lives. Even when we don't understand the reasons for our struggles, God can bring healing, joy, and restoration in His time. Job's story teaches us that while pain and suffering are real, they don't have the final word. Faithfulness, patience, and trust in God can lead to restoration, and sometimes even a greater blessing than we had before. Job went through his hardships, learned deep lessons about God's wisdom, and in the end, saw God's goodness and faithfulness in a way he couldn't have understood at the beginning. His life, though full of tragedy, became a story of hope and redemption. Job's restoration is a reminder that even when we face tough times, we don't know what the future holds. God sees the bigger picture, and sometimes there's a blessing waiting for us on the other side of our struggles. So, the next time things go wrong in your life, remember Job. Even when it feels like everything's falling apart, God is always there. Keep trusting, keep praying, and know that He can restore what's been lost in ways you might not even imagine. Just like Job, we may not always get the answers we want, but we can always trust that God has a plan. And in the end, there's always hope for a better tomorrow.